Well, he doesn't.
I need to, hopefully Christy printed off.
Hi, everybody. We're gonna get started in just a little bit. Yeah, Jonathan, what's up?
Oh, hi. Sorry. Clicked on the button by accident.
Oh, no
But
problem.
hi. Good to see
Hi,
you.
everybody. Dave Helisack, I've got you as a panelist, so you should be able to, when the time comes, share your screen or any slides you have.
Okay, Jessica, when Ashley comes on, could you put her on as well? Because she's going to have the graphs. Could you put her as a panelist as well? Thanks.
Sure. Okay, we're just gonna wait a few minutes for others to arrive. Okay, Ashley and Dave, you are both on as panelists, so when the time comes, you should be able to share your screen, your video, any slides you have. I know that Kathy texted she's on her way, and also Mary let me know that the webinar ID was posted wrong. My apologies. It is 863-6045-6491. In progress. We're ready whenever you are. Oh, Pat's gonna fix that. I think that's Pat. Sorry.
All right, well, I'm calling this special meeting of the Board of Trustees to order. Please call the roll.
Hathaway,
Present.
Palmer,
She just stepped out.
soon to be here. Flintoff, present. Carrie,
Present.
Noel,
Soon to be here.
Riser, absent. And Brazeau, absent. And Donna is here. So we have 4 present, with a 5th on the way, we have quorum.
All right, let's pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't think we really have an agenda. We just have presentation and discussion of the audit, right?
Yeah, so, and we do public comment once at a special meeting. We can do it
Right,
either at
right.
the top or the bottom.
Yeah, let's get that out of the way. Is there public comment? Jonathan Greenberg.
I was going to make a public comment, but I think I'd rather wait till the full board. I thought this would be a little.
Yeah, I was just, my public comment is get them out of the way. Seriously, that's your attitude towards us?
Liz?
I would prefer to make public comment after I've learned the content of the public meeting.
That's fine. Let's wait until the end.
Okay, so Will, the only thing on our agenda is the purpose of the meeting, which is to hear a presentation from our auditors. I'd like to invite Ashley Fraze and Dave Helisack from Plant Moran to join. They're joining via Zoom. And my suggestion, I made this to the board, and my suggestion, Will, is that we have discussion, hear the presentation and have questions of the auditors. I know they're on kind of a tight timeline, so that we try to focus our question and conversation, questions for the auditors first. If we have questions and conversation for each other, the board to try to do that second, so that they can get out of here.
Okay. David and Ashley, why don't you proceed with your presentation, please?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear us? Zoom is somewhat new to us again, so I suspect you can hear and see our presentation at this point.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for meeting, allowing us to meet with the board this afternoon. Again, my name is Dave Helisek. I'll partner with Plant Moran, and with me this afternoon is Ashley Fraze, Senior Manager with the firm. And we're here to discuss the results of the financial statement audit for Scio Township for the year ended March 31st of 2023. Prior to this meeting, the township board would have received draft copies of the financial statement and the required communication to those charged with governance. As was discussed in a previous draft meeting, these statements are not finalized yet because we're going through our proofreading and processing process as we speak. We don't anticipate that anything that's covered today is going to change in content, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone who was attending the meeting would have understood why these are, in draft form rather than in final form. As a reminder, under Public Act 2 of 1968, the township is required to submit their financial statements to Treasury within 180 days of the fiscal year end, which in the township's case would be September 30th. So we're all working towards that goal of getting the finalized copies of these documents completed and loaded up to Treasury by that time. The presentation this afternoon will be similar to ones that have been done in the past. Ashley's going to cover the financial highlights through a graph presentation. I will then cover the required communications to those charged with governance, and then we take any questions that anyone might have related to anything that we have presented today. So before I turn it over to Ashley to start with the financial highlights, as far as the statement itself and the opinion, as a result of our audit, Plant Moran is able to give Scio Township an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can give a set of financial statements. What that means is these statements as presented fairly reflect the financial position of the township as of March 31st, 2023, and the change in that financial position, or the revenues, expenditures, cash flows, as well as the notes within the statement. So again, the highest level of assurance that we can give, and one that we're happy to give as a result of this year's audit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to walk through our graph package. Ashley?
Thanks, Dave. And you can see the slide deck presentation.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this first slide here is the township's the main operating fund of the township, and this slide presents revenues for fiscal 2023 on the far right and the past 2 years prior to that. As total revenue increased about 324,000 from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal 23. And you can see in the dark blue, the tallest column there, state shared revenue does continue to be the township's largest revenue stream at about $2 million for the year end March 31st, 23, or 43% of the total. Property taxes and local sources were both approximately 1.3 million for 2023, increased just slightly from the prior year. Moving on to the next slide is the same general fund, but these are expenditures for the year ends by function or by category. So total expenditures increased about 1.5 million for fiscal 2023. You can see public safety and general government are the largest, and they did remain consistent, but transfers to other funds in the teal did increase significantly. So this $1.8 million transfer to other funds does include the $1.4 million forgiveness of the loan that was made from the general fund to the fire fund in the prior year, and it was forgiven in fiscal 23, and so accounted for as a transfer out of the general fund. And then taking all of, the revenues and expenditures each year into consideration, this slide presents the ending fund balance at March 31st each year. 2023 again is the far right column on this graph, where the general fund ended with about 6.63 million of fund balance at March 31st, 2023. You can see there's about $1,800 of fund balance that's restricted, and that was restricted for opioids. So there was the opioid settlement, and the general fund receipted that in, but hadn't yet spent it. So that's restricted for that purpose. And the remainder 6.629 million in the general fund is unassigned fund balance or available. There's no specific assignment or restrictions of use for that amount as of March 31st, 2023. Did want to point out in the past, you'll see there were more amounts in the teal. Those were non-spendable or assigned amounts prior to 2023. And really, that was that loan, the advance that was made to the fire fund that was included as non-spendable fund balance in the past, as well as any budgeted use of fund balance in the following year would be assigned as of that year end. So for 2023, there was no budgeted use of fund balance looking ahead to 24. And so there was no required assignment of that fund balance. Shifting gears a little bit, we'll look at the water and sewer fund now, the other, significant funds for the township. So this covers the operations for the water fund on this slide. So on the far right is 2023. So for 2023, as well as the past 5 years, operating expenses, which does include depreciation, have been slightly higher than operating revenues each year. When considering connection fees in the orange each year, new developments and connection into the system, the operating loss is offset a little bit for each of those years. And then the sewer fund, very, similar type graph here, just shows again operating expenses, which includes depreciation, does exceed operating revenue each year, and then the connection fees were increased a little bit for 2023. And it will say just, it's not, operating loss isn't, whether a positive or a negative indicator. I think the township just continuing to monitor, where ending net position is for these water and sewer funds each year as part of the rate setting and budget process will continue to be important. That's all I had for the financial piece. Any questions before I turn it back over to Dave to cover the letter?
Any questions? I don't see any questions.
Okay, great. I will share the letter now.
I can take that. I can share the letter
Oh, okay, great.
because then I can scroll down. All right. All right. Can everyone see the letter? Are we good? The communication? Okay. Thanks, Ashley. So the second deliverable, as has been in the past, is a required communication to those charged with governance. So you can see on the top of page 1, we've really broken out into 3 sections, 2 of which are actually required. Section 3 is the legislative and informational type items that we like to provide our governmental clients. So they're kind of what's going on, just maybe statewide or federally, any changes in any upcoming standards that may impact reporting on a go-forward basis. Starting with section 1, it's our internal control related matters identified as part of our audit. So I had mentioned earlier, we were able to give the result of our audit was an unmodified opinion. So that's an opinion on the financial statements as presented. As part of the auditing standards, we are required to understand the internal control system. We are required to test the internal control system, but we don't give a direct opinion on the internal controls themselves. However, during the course of our audit, if things come to our attention that rise to a certain level that would indicate deficiencies, either control deficiencies, significant deficiencies, or overall material weaknesses in the township's availability to report their financial information, we are required to communicate those in a matter such as this one, where we're documenting and making it available to those charged with governance. So what I'm scrolling down is kind of our standard language in as far as what controls are and what deficiencies are versus a material weakness. So I'm going to just jump right in and just kind of hit the bullet points on the items that we came across in the township's internal control system that we would deem to be material weaknesses. So the first item is the segregation of duties during the audit, and I know we can all read this, but the gist of it is that when any individual has the ability to post journal entries and has access to cash receipts or custody of any asset functions, that can be deemed a weakness in the overall system under the segregation of duties. Most units will try to keep authorization, custody, and record keeping under different guises. So in instances when that does happen, it would be imperative that the township does implement some sort of mitigating control in those instances to ensure that the proper oversight and review is done of anyone who may have the ability to, again, post entries as well as have access to assets or any sort of cash receipting. So that's the first item on segregation of duties. The tax collection fund.
Wait, David,
yes.
Can I ask a question about the segregation of duties?
Yes.
Because I've been thinking about that since we met earlier in the week. Who or what weakness were you thinking of when you raised that question?
Well, it's just in general. If an individual at any time during the year had the ability to post entries,
So it's hypothetical?
No.
I don't think it's hypothetical. I think that's the control system. I'm not indicating here that anything occurred because of it, but at the same time, we're not testing 100% of the transactions. We're taking a look and talking about the control system in general. So there wasn't a specific occurrence that we could point to that would indicate anything went wrong. We're taking a look at the control system in and of itself and making this suggestion.
And Dave, what might help the supervisor understand, could you describe what post adjustments to the general ledger means?
Yeah, so an individual who would have the ability to make manual journal entries into the general ledger system.
Right.
I have a quick question on that. So give us some examples of what the township could do to implement more adequate controls.
Yeah, I would say, well, what Ashley and I would see in most instances like this would be if there's a need for someone in that receipt or custody function to, whatever they're working on results in the need for a general journal entry. Normally that would be written up and then it would be actually turned over to someone in the finance area who would then review the entry and post it themselves. So it could be written up by someone in the cash receipt and in the custody function, but the actual posting would be done by somebody independent of that system.
Mhm.
So you're saying that the fact that one person can do both right now is a material weakness that is causing, that has the potential to cause issues for Scio?
Correct. Yeah, without
He didn't say
mitigating
one
control,
person.
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
It's plural.
yeah. If there are, if there are folks with those responsibilities, and it's deemed necessary by the board that they do have that, there needs to be some sort of mitigating control that can lower the risk of misstatements.
So this would be through a policy or through statute or both?
Yeah, I suspect it wouldn't be through statute. It would normally this would roll, through policy. And again, this is, our goal is to communicate what we identify, and then it's up to the board to decide what to do, if anything, as it relates to this suggestions or any of the other ones that we bring forward this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, sorry, I didn't mean to slow us down so much.
That's all right. No,
Please go forward.
it's a great question. On the tax collection fund, so during the audit, we had identified that the township had over dispersed and under dispersed some property taxes to the other taxing units. This resulted in a journal entry in the tax funds, and there was an extra receivable recorded, and then when those monies would be received, those would be payable to the other taxing units, which would have caused a delay of those final monies out to those local taxing units. So again, our suggestion is just to implement the procedures and controls around the collections to make sure that they are dispersed to the taxing units in accordance to statute. Excuse me.
So and Dave, on the general ledger part, the accounting for in the general ledger, what would be some recommendations there to properly account for those amounts in the general ledger?
Yeah, I mean, in instances where this does happen, my recollection was that the receivable and amounts due from the entities that are overpaid were netted with the amounts that were going to be due to the ones that are overpaid, but those are really two separate transactions. So the receivables should be an asset, the payables should be a liability, and it should really show up gross because, while related, they're actually independent of each other at the same time.
Right. Thank you.
Capital assets. So we've got a weakness on capital assets, and this really relates to the reporting of activity within the financial statement on your full accrual statement. So I want to be clear, the actual payments, out and these expenses were reported correctly on our modified basis, or I'm sorry, on the township's modified basis, which is really when the cash was being paid out. The material weakness was the conversion to the full accrual accounting, which requires the township to identify those items that should be capitalized for use over a period of over 1 year. Oh, I'm sorry, more than 1 year, and then depreciate that and only those items that would meet those qualifications. So we've got an instance here where there was an item that was actually put on as a capitalized item, which wouldn't have met that criteria that needed to be adjusted for. So that's more of a financial reporting type of item. So as part of your closing on an annual basis, it's really just making sure as it relates to capital assets, is really just digging in and understanding those capital outlay accounts and truly identifying what should be capitalized and in accordance to the standards and what really shouldn't be capitalized. As far as budget's concerned, should have had any impact on any of the information that the township would have been receiving throughout the year. Audit adjustments. So as part of the audit, we do identify journal entries and we make recommendations after discussions with management on those. After management, understands what our proposed entries are, then they make the decision whether they agree with it or not, and then post those entries. When they're done, that does, in part go with the final presentation, which allows us to opine on the statements, which again was an unmodified opinion for this year. When the entries reach a certain level that we deem to be material, then we do have to communicate those more significant adjustments to those charged with governance here. And really we're bringing out two, and one has to do with some grant monies that came in advance of spending. So when that happens, grants can be very tricky, and the township really needs to make sure they're reading and understanding the terms of the grant agreement. Some allow for immediate revenue recognition, and some require that it actually be reported as an unearned revenue or a liability until the point where all the qualifications have been met. A lot of times, which is actually the expending of the dollars, and then the revenue can be recorded at that time to match the expenditure. So there was instances here where there was about $1.9 million that had been reported as revenue, hadn't been spent, and by the terms of the grant, that really needs to be recorded as unearned revenue, and will be, it will be recognized as revenue in future periods as those dollars are spent. In another instance, and I believe this is related to the Ren's property, there were contributions that came in as part of that whole transaction. So when you've got, significant and more complex transactions, especially that result in significant funding, we just need to make sure that everything is accounted for when determining what the revenue and the expenditures are. In this case, there was contributions that came from other entities for about $857,000 that were part of the closing transactions, and that needs to be as a part of the whole analysis. So again, probably not impacting anything that you were seeing throughout the year, but from a financial reporting perspective, we just need to make sure that all of that is taken into account when providing the information to be ready to be audited. Excuse me again. Utility billing and adjustments. So we've talked about utility billing, I think, in the past here. So this year the communication is just a little bit different. So there was, again, some multiple updates as it related to revenues being reported and actually some of the costs, making sure all the payables were posted. and whatnot. But as part of the reconciliation, when we started to dig deeper as a group, and I would say it wasn't just, us that was digging deep, it was, the township was involved as well. But as it related to some reads throughout the year, there were some billing adjustments due to some misreads that actually resulted in I'll say some improper posting of activity that ultimately wasn't corrected. In this case that's brought out here, between the water and sewer fund, there was approximately $112,000 of $112,000 credited to a parcel that you due to a bad read, or perhaps even a bad meter, that as a result, this parcel is carrying a significant credit balance, and in discussion with the township, doesn't appear to be accurate. So there needs to be oversight when there's, unusual transactions like this, when we're seeing large debits or large credits going to specific accounts. I know per our discussion within the past week, the water and sewer department is looking into those discrepancies, which is great now, but really there needs to be a process in place when, these unusual transactions are happening. They're addressed more timely, and the resolution, which would really include all significant adjustments to the water and sewer system, are supported and authorized by specific documentation.
Could you give us more information about these billing adjustments that were incorrect? I don't understand it.
So I will do my best. I think the water and sewer department would probably be better to answer that question, but I would envision it, and I'm not saying this is exactly what happened, but something like this could result in what happened. Let's just say your a meter resulted in 100 units, and when it was read, it had, let me see, it had like 1,000 units, or it was just wrong. So they went and did the correction on it to correct the 100 units, but instead of correcting for 100, they corrected it for 1,000. So that created this big credit balance. So the read was just wrong, and created, instead of a bill, it created a credit. I can't tell you the specifics because I'm not a meter reader as to how it happened, but it was right in the billing register that you could see there was a large adjustment there. Normally, and we've seen this in at least a few instances when that's happened, it was addressed by the township. They identified it. And then actually the month we were looking at, there was two meter reads that really had the same issue. One was corrected. So the township went back in, did a billing adjustment, and reversed the credit, and then basically applied what the bill should have been for the one parcel. That didn't happen on the second parcel. So I can't explain why it didn't happen. But as the information was shared with our team, that was also the conclusion that came up to the water and sewer folks as well.
I have a question. Maybe this is directed more towards Lori than the auditors, but was this a meter, the meter itself that had the problem?
In this particular case, there was a meter failure that was not detected because one meter failed, the sprinkler meter didn't fail. And so it set a negative 6,000 unit credit to this account, but they kept getting bills from their sprinkler every quarter. So it went undetected. There was no flag that said, hello, wait a second. And nobody called up from that business and said, I will take my $112,000. So we are on that. We're also trying to isolate a system that will set off a warning, because we've already had one more since then have this happen where the meter has failed to a high volume customer. And all we can do is catch it as quick as we can or fix it when we can find it at this point. But that's exactly what happened.
So is this a newer type reader? Because I know
No.
this is older, okay.
Yeah, and Rich and I have been working very hard to try and get even all of the high volume areas where they have to go in and actually manually get a number and then manually type it in. There's room for failure. You know, there's manual data entry errors. So those, when we catch them, and you know, hopefully this is the last of that kind of stuff, but it slipped through because they kept getting bills. You know, normally what's happened with all of the failures to the meters, and I'm sorry, the meter readers, when I see that somebody's being estimated for a continued period of time, we try to get a hold of the homeowner, we try to get in there and make the repair, so nobody should be estimated anymore. I mean, that's a room for error right there. So in this particular case, there was no estimate. There was no estimate being asked for. It just kept getting slipped through because it was getting a bill.
Thank you.
And I do want to note, though, that, I mean, in addition to Lori and Rich and others will be addressing these problems, you know, the auditor's note is a good one, that we need better procedures and controls in place to catch this at the time, and sooner when these quirks happen. So.
Thank you.
The next item is the adoption of the new accounting standards. So this was an item that I think we've talked about at least last year and perhaps even 2 years ago, with the implementation of a new standard, GASB 87, as it related to lease accounting. And we knew it was going to be a heavy lift for the township, but they really need to go through and identify any arrangements that would qualify as a leasing arrangement, either as a lessee or lessor, do some analysis and then determine whether or not the township would, because of the amount or the significance of these arrangements, would be required to implement and report or record this activity beginning with the March 31st, 2023 year end. So the township had started that and then turned it over to us for audit. And the good news is, you know, on what was turned over, that we agreed with the township's position on the ones that were identified. But we do completeness testing, where we then do an analysis on to ensure that at a very high level, to ensure that the township did potentially identify anything that would meet that requirement. In this instance, there was actually two additional items or two additional arrangements that the township didn't initially identify and analyze. So that would be, you know, finding as well. So the township does need to ensure, as it relates to this standard and other upcoming standards, that not only an existence test, so the ones that we do know about, but a completeness test to ensure, you know, items that you may not necessarily come to mind, you know, going through the financial records, looking for any reoccurring type arrangements or type payments that could potentially meet this definition. And I talk about this going forward because the township, for the March 31st, 2024 year end, will be implementing GASB 96, which is a similar analysis, which our clients are finding to be even more in depth, although maybe not as significant in total dollars, but as it relates to subscription-based IT arrangements. So our firm has had some training. We've got some webinars on that, so that the township can understand what we're looking for, or what your auditors are looking for. But it's really important that everyone, you know, not only understands the standard, but you're, you know, identifying the proper resources to get into these and identify everything that might qualify.
And I'll just agree, Dave, that was our mistake. Our error was the completeness test, I guess you'd call it, is not identifying all of them, and that will be an issue going forward.
What would be an example? It says leases.
Dave, can you give some of the
Ashley, do you have
less
the
obvious
two that
examples? Because
Ashley, do you
Yeah,
have
so
the
I
two
think there
that
was
weren't?
about seven or eight in total. The original list we received would have included, 5. And so when we were going through, I'm pulling up the details right now. Just one second. We
Ashley.
identified so their rental of a welding gas vertical tank. So the township's a lessor where, they pay a monthly amount to a vendor for renting this tank. And then the other one was I believe rental income. There was air lease revenue from a agreement in place that wasn't included in the township's original analysis.
But the standard itself is saying historically, you may have just expensed, as cash went out the door, or as cash was coming in the door, as on these relationships, just recorded the revenue. The standard set is indicating that this relationships exists. So, in the case where cash is coming in the door, it might be a 7-year, like for a cell tower or something like that. You might have a 7 or 10-year arrangement. What it's saying is, it needs to be more than a cash basis. You essentially have a receivable that's going to be, received over 7 years. You'll have an unearned income because you're not going to recognize it till it actually comes in, but it is an asset, a known asset for the township, even if it's in the future. And it would be similar in rent arrangements as well, or if you're in a situation where you're paying any sort of rent. If you're in a contract and it's like, well, but I don't have any asset for it. It's like, well, you've got the right to use that asset. So in those cases, you actually have an offsetting right to use asset with some debt along with it.
Mhm.
And again, the same thing's going to be here, just dealing with IT arrangements for GASB 96 in the upcoming year.
Thank you.
The last finding again relates to manual adjustments to journal entries. So we do testing. We don't test on 100% of all the manual journal entries, but I would say we do more focused testing. So we did have an instance where there was a manual entry that did involve cash, where there wasn't specific documentation attached to the entry. So that really should be a requirement for all manual type journal entries, that there be some sort of system where if not attached to a paper copy, some sort of reference to the support for all manual type journal entries. Now, at the same time, it was only a couple $1,000s. So not, terribly significant, but it really is, I would say, almost imperative that there be support for all manual journal entries that is easily available and accessible.
And I'll just share for the board, that is mandatory, but this was a mistake that was made. So we need to tighten that up with our protocols and training for that.
I'm going to go on to the second part of the letter. So these are required communications to those charged with governance. So these aren't necessarily internal control type matters, but these would have been items that would have come to our attention as far as compliance is concerned, that would have been required to be reported under the auditing standards. So we have identified 3 items as it relates to non-compliance. This first one's a repeat, and it relates to funding OPEB trusts when you have employees that have entered the program or the trust program after June 30th of 2018. So you have a new employee that's going to be is going to receive this benefit. Public Act 202 of 217 requires that the township fund the normal cost of those new employees in a trust. So essentially an OPEB trust. Now, I believe the township is in the process of doing that. In fact, may have even tried to do that close to year end. But the trust hadn't been established as of March 31st. So we did need to report this as a compliance finding. The second item really reverts back to the property tax item as it related to the overpayments and the underpayments. So due to the underpayments, Public Act 206 of 1893 does give specific timelines as it relates to the distribution of those tax revenues. So we've defined that under the second bullet point. And then the last one is of March 31st of 23, the bridge maintenance fund had a deficit of $25,765 in it. Under Public Act 2, again, of 68, it would indicate that before you incur an expense that would create this type of deficit, that you identify the related revenues that would have covered that. So in this instance, it's most likely, in fact, almost with certainty, there's going to be a communication from Treasury asking for a deficit elimination plan. Most likely they'll need to be approved by the board as to identify what the resolution will be to, for lack of a better term, get rid of this deficit of $25,765. So you can expect that at a minimum, that communication from Treasury. Scoping down the rest of the letter, again, just the highlights. There are estimates involved. So, a lot of the findings that we've talked about at this point are specific transactions that we identify, but in audits also do rely on sensitive estimates. Some of the more significant ones are the unbilled water and sewer receivables. So the township does not go on March 31st, nor would we expect them to go out and read every meter in the township and determine what the actual reads are and try to do a calculation as to what had been billed at that time. So you use billing registers from after that period to take an estimate that we test and get comfortable with. In addition, as far as the pension and OPEB liability, those involve numerous assumptions, which will include investment rates of return, mortality tables, experience, and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into that liability, but keep in mind that that is an estimate. It's prepared by a third-party actuary who's certified, and we do testing not only on the numbers, but do review the actuary reports for reasonableness, so that especially as it relates to these assumptions, that they would be, we're at least in the range that we would expect. So we do audit estimates as well. As far as corrected and uncorrected misstatements, so we are again required to report those here. So in this instance here, we've in this section we have repeated because this is section 2, the 1.9 million, the 857 as it related to unearned revenue and grants. So those entries were made and corrected, but we still have to let those charged with governance know that we made those. As far as uncorrected misstatements, specifically down in this area, we do have some instances where, especially as it kind of got later, and then maybe even more specifically as we're determining, or as the township's determining resolution of that water and sewer billing snafu, there were certain transactions that the township chose not to include as they're still trying to resolve those. They felt they were immaterial. We agreed with that they wouldn't, their exclusion wouldn't have a material impact on the financial statement, but we include that here just so everyone's aware that those transactions weren't included within the this year's audit. And then finally, section 3 here. So as you can see, this is why it's still in proofreading, because this will be done. But we've got a lot of information here on upcoming not only pronouncements, but as it relates to federal resources and what a single audit may look like. As the finance team of the township would know, we wrestled probably for a week or so trying to determine if indeed the township had enough federal revenue this year to actually require a single audit. I mean, there was some agreements that were a bit confusing if it was direct federal revenue or not, or if it was qualified to the extent that the township had to actually contact not only consultant, but the grantor to help them determine if it fell under that criteria. So this is just a reminder with all grants, as you're getting them, and maybe not necessarily on the back end while compliance is mandatory, really understanding if they would fall under a potential single audit if the township in any given year had received more than had spent more than $750,000 in federal funds in any given year. So again, that would be important to keep track of during the year, so that it's not a surprise come end of the year. You may determine that you've got an additional audit, federal programs audit / single audit on top of the annual financial statement audit. Other than that, I'm just going through this real quickly. Again, most of this is just informational in nature. We talked about subscription-based IT arrangements. What I would suggest is whoever's going to be charged with that, we have on our Plant Moran website still free access to webinars and trainings that we've had on that, on how to identify and record and report. And I know that you've got some folks, that you consulting wise that you've identified to help you with that, but that is available for all to read. I don't know if 94 will be applicable, but that will be, if you've got an instance here, we've got a public-private partnership and you're doing something jointly, there would be a reporting requirement. So if you believe you've got that should be something we should talk about in the near future as well. So with that, be happy to try to answer any additional questions that you have.
I've got a few questions. So I'm trying to pull all of this information together. And I would like you to compare where we are this year to last year. I'm a bit concerned because I'm noting all of these material weaknesses. And I thought we had many of these last year. So if you could, how many did we have last year, and are there any new ones this year?
Yeah, so I don't have last year's in front of me, so I'll do my best.
I do, yeah.
I'm going to say that segregation of duties, I believe that was discussed last year.
Yes.
So
The tax collection item, because of the specific, this specifically, I think, is a new item regarding the underpayment and overpayment. The capital assets is new because that was really transaction based on an agreement that happened during the year. Usually we do have something on audit adjustments. They might not be the same, but if there is an adjustment that reaches a certain level, we do report it. I just don't recall if last year we had something that reached that materiality level.
We did.
We did.
Okay, yep. The utility billing was this specific instance where we're identifying the credit to the account is new. That wasn't something that we identified last year. As far as the needs for multiple follow-ups and updates, I would say that was an item last year. I can't recall if we reported that or not, but that was something that took a while for us to get from the township to complete the audit.
What was that again?
That,
Sorry.
that was, so under the utility billing adjustments and supporting schedule, so that first sentence, as far as getting information, it took a while to get information from the township that was supporting the numbers that were being reported in the general ledger. We got numerous iterations of that until probably, I think, in the last 10 days, we got one that basically was supporting the activity in the general ledger.
So why was that?
That I can't answer because we were the recipient. We were not the ones putting the information together.
So how does the board answer that question?
Is that a question to the board or is that a question to me?
Question to you.
Oh,
For starters.
well, I think it's
To the board.
well, I think it's oversight to make, the township, as it relates to utility billing, I think with the township, and it sounds like you're working on getting the right people involved here. Is when you're taking a look at utility billing and when I say utility billing, I'd take a look at the water and sewer system as a whole and say that we need a process in place that one identifies, the whole credit issue, but at the same time, taking a step back and ensuring that there's 12 months worth of revenues that are booked in any given year. There's 12 months worth of costs booked in any given year. And when you're providing information to the auditors and they're asking for support to whatever general ledger balance is there, those schedules that are turned over actually agree to the general ledger balances that are reported by the township. And there was much back and forth on not only the revenue, but I believe actually on the unbilled receivable as well. There was a couple of iterations on that. So I can't tell you how or why it happened. I can just tell you that it did.
Okay, we'll follow up with the board.
There wasn't a new, on the new accounting standards, that's going to be new this year. This is a new standard. But again, I think that because there's a new one that's looking pretty similar to this 87 that came in this year, that would be an important focus. And the manual journal entry that lacks support, I don't believe that. I think that's new. I don't believe that we reported on one that lacked support in the past. Non-compliance, bullet point 1 is a repeat. Bullet point 3 is not, that's new. And I can't recall if we had one on 2 last year or not. If it was on 2, it was for a different reason than it was for this year. I don't know, Jessica, if you've got that.
Which question, Dave?
This is
About
I'm sorry, this is the non-compliance in section 2.
Yeah, last year it was about OPEB as it is this year, but that should go away next year. Last year it was about not providing investment reports.
Okay, so that one's been cleared. That one was provided, so that one's good this year.
We have received investment reports this year. And I guess the one repeat is the late distribution of tax revenue.
Okay, so that was one. I think for different reasons, though. I don't think it's the same. It was for a different reason than we identified this year. But I'd have to look back into what those were specifically. So those are the items by items. From a positive standpoint, we're sitting here on September 27th. 3 days, but 3 days before the deadline, which, we couldn't say that a year ago. I believe the township a year ago may have been sitting here trying to approve an extension of time to file. So I think the last 2 years there's been a required extension, and I checked before we came in. We're in our processing department is in its second proof of it. So I'm highly optimistic that this is going to be reported to Treasury by the end of the week.
Oh, I hope so.
Great. Thank you, Dave, for all your and Ashley's hard work.
I have a question of Dave. Dave, where, I don't see it, I think there was a communique sent to you. Those checks that were missing in the previous year, which was entered into last year's audit, they were found by the bank on their premises in this past calendar year. Where can that be entered showing that I didn't lose the checks? The township didn't lose the checks.
The audit never says the township did.
There was something referenced in the audit. We just want to be sure that
Yeah, I think,
officially there's some clarification
yeah,
noted.
so my recollection is, and again, Jessica, maybe you can help here.
Yeah.
Either in section 1 or 2, when we talked about that, I think the discussion was around the control of resolution.
Would you like me to read that real quick?
If you,
Dave?
it would be great, because I just don't have a copy in front of me. The finding, because it wouldn't have been included in, let me just be clear, it wouldn't have been included in the financial statement. It wouldn't be there. That's not a financial statement issue. It would have been reported in this letter. So if you can help Jessica on what it says.
And this is, to be clear, this is the letter from last year end 22. One of the first material weaknesses, cash receipts and deposits. During the year end March 31, 2022, the township identified that on a specific date, monies had been collected and a deposit slip that was completed, but monies were not deposited to the bank and credited to the township. Although this was detected by the township, the reconciliation and resolution of this error was beyond the range of timely internal controls. Without adequate procedures and controls surrounding cash receipts and reconciliations and deposit functions, there is a risk of misappropriation of assets. We recommend that the township implement procedures and controls to close and reconcile receipts on a daily basis, take deposits to the bank only with prepared deposit slips that have been reconciled to the daily receipt reports, and prepare deposit slips and take deposits to the bank the same day.
Which we've always done.
Yeah.
So, okay, you answered my question.
Okay. I just want to be clear. I think we focus more on the control versus the specific instance or what had actually happened. So,
Donna, are the receipts reconciled on a daily basis?
Not on a daily, because sometimes we have hardly anything, but at least 3 times a week it's done, and it's done through the system. Very accurate system, so when necessary, it's done more frequently, like heavy duty deadlines.
Software system, is that what you mean?
Well, BSNA, I mean, our cash receipting system is part of the closing out of the receipts.
I'm just noting that in last year, they recommended that we reconcile receipts on a daily basis.
Well, I could pull the report, which is easy to do to make sure what's, the tapes equal. But there are times when we have a mere handful, literally. So. As things grow, it'll be different.
if I may just add to that, yeah, I think Donna, you're right. I think there's 2 parts to that. I think the first one is really the Z. I think it's still a Z tape if they're run, or what used to be a Z tape, but basically you're doing a reconciliation of the drawer, not necessarily the deposit. I mean, we've seen that happen where it might be 2 or 3 days worth of deposits and that goes in, but really the reconciliation of the cash drawer probably should be done daily. You're running the tape and making sure what the receipts are in that reconciliation, and at the end of the day, the cash is put in the safe, and then you've got, when you actually make those deposits, you may have 2 or 3 days worth, but you've got some sort of record that it is the 3 days, here's how the drawers were closed and these are the receipts for those days. So it can be two parts. If, you know, I'm not going to say if you've collected $5 that you should run to the bank by any means, but at the same time, you know, the review of that cash drawer should really be, you know, part of some sort of daily procedure of reconciliation. Again, that would be my suggestion. It's up to, you know, up to you all on what the best process is for the township.
And Donna, you're the one who had the update from the bank, and I recognize it was just a strange situation. But the auditors state that the monies were not deposited to the bank and credited to the township. My understanding is that the bank suddenly had the checks, but it's not that they were suddenly deposited into our account.
No, they called me because I'd already
Replaced.
worked with the
Understood,
people and
understood.
they replaced checks.
And they were found at a different branch
A
than we
year
normally
later.
bank at.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's weird.
So that's
Okay, but you answered my question. It isn't something that. Okay.
Trustee Kier?
Thank you. Thanks, Will. So Dave, it sounds to me, and I'm going by memory from last year, that this is actually a better audit in many ways. But there is consistency with one thing that keeps popping up here, and it's the implementing procedures and controls. And this is in almost every single paragraph under section 1.
Yeah, if, you know, I would say you know, if the fact again that we're here in September talking versus December is a positive. I'll remind the township board in both instances, you know, we were able to get to an unmodified opinion. So the statements as presented were accurately presented. You know, the one thing, the one focus that I think the township also needs to think about is there's the information, you know, most of which we've talked about here that really should be addressed during the year. Most of these transactions and most of these items are things that are happening or occurring during the year. You know, if there are unusual transactions or things that the township's not familiar with, by all means, reach out. You know, we're more than happy to assist getting through that. The other thing which we really don't talk about, but since you asked, you know, we started this engagement, I would say, in the middle of June with the thought and the discussion with the township that we would be primarily done by the end of June, with perhaps waiting for some of the actuarial reports to be finalized and having you know, having to do a little bit of work in early to mid-July. And again, we were writing journal entries up until last week. So the closing process should be another area of focus. You know, you know, ideally, if all of the activity is, you know, is being addressed during the year, there isn't, you know, it isn't as big of a fire drill at the end of the year during audit prep to try to get ready. And I get it. I'm not going to try to undersell what the effort is by the township to get ready for an audit, because I know it's a lot and we're asking for a lot. But at the same time, I would say, you know, most local units of government wouldn't extend into the 4th or 5th month, and even close to the 6th of trying to have the financial information, you know, ready for audit. And it's not fair. Absolutely 85% was probably there, but the last 15% did take a long time to get resolved.
And I mean, if I could just say, I mean, I wouldn't say that this is better than last year. I would say, you know, I'm grateful to have the audit, and it continues to be the lack of sufficient qualified finance staff in the township. And it's been a problem we're starting to address. You know, we're starting to take some steps, but we need to do more. Things like being up on standards, having the appropriate month-end, quarter-end processes, that would knock off probably, I think, 4 or 5 of these material weaknesses. Had we been keeping up the books properly, the journals and ledgers. It's made more complicated by the segregation of duties issues that this board has imposed on the township, starting in 21 and 22, with the 2 resolutions, which was the basis. But relevant to this, it is the basis for the first finding that has appeared now 2 years in a row. Those were board actions on that basis.
We do need to address this as a
So,
board. But I wanna, I wanna just kind of step back. And David, we have PM gap in place now. Are they aware of all of these issues, and are they incorporating these suggestions into what they're doing? I'm looking at Joyce asking this question.
Just gonna comment in reference to PM Gap being here with Ally Norris. Part of her role, once the audit is completed and submitted, is to actually work with us on all of these issues and help us come up with solutions so that this does not occur again next year. And, I think we're gonna not only have her expertise, but others at Plant Moran to assist us with processes, procedures, things of that nature, internal controls.
And if I can I
Go
add to
ahead,
that?
go ahead, David.
Yes.
And I think I've reminded, everyone who's been involved in this discussion with Ally and her team. So yes, based on what PM Gap is going to do, we would no longer be independent, so we can't audit. But that doesn't mean Ashley and myself disappear. Ally and I are in the same office. In fact, we talked this morning. So I will continue to be a huge resource when needed, not only for Ally, but for the township. You're going to be in great hands with Brian Miller, but at the same time, you're always going to have the firm behind you and the resources, especially the institutional knowledge that we have as it relates to Scio Township. We've been doing the audit for a long time. So that doesn't go away. So yes, in those instances, we'll be sharing what we know, as it relates to any of these. And, we would be also, if Joyce and her team, needs us or would like to talk to me about anything, she has my number.
We all have your number.
Is that good or is that bad?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of you.
Will, I have a question.
Please proceed.
Dave, putting you on the spot a little bit here. So you said, began in the middle of June and thinking it would be finished by the end of June or July. And there was some delays. So how much, I know that we have a contract with you, but having these extra months, how much did that cost taxpayers?
So I will, I'm not putting, I will be putting that bill together on Friday. We were really more focused. I mean, we were outside the scope of the contract. That was something that I discussed with finance as we went along. It is, I don't know, but I would have a definitive number for you absolutely on Friday.
Thank you.
And to add to that, and I've mentioned this in prior report to the board, I think even back in June, I let the board know. But in addition to extra Plant Moran costs, which we also paid last year, we'll have the cost for Meena Casterison, who's been assisting with our year-end prep. And that's what we brought them on, I think it was back in February, to do. So those are the costs they're all working on closing out year-end. And I think that time and time again, when we bring in consulting CPAs, they say, this is more than year-end closeout. This is catching up throughout the year. And so that's what I'm hopeful that we can, stop this cycle of always being behind, unprepared, making mistakes.
So this is where the implementing, sorry, take my glasses off.
Well, I think it's both things. It's
Procedures and
internal,
controls.
it's having a culture of internal controls, it's having actual internal controls, it's having agreement on the importance of internal controls. But I think it's also qualified finance staff, enough of them, because until there's enough, like, it's something as simple as grants, right? We've had a draft grants policy for 3 years. Well, there's no point in implementing it. There's nobody to implement it. Like, we've been so short-staffed. So we need to kind of build the capacity of staff as we implement process.
Yeah,
And key here is not just building the bodies. It's you getting bodies that know how to do it correctly.
qualified.
And I've been researching. There is information that I'll give to the board in the future
Okay.
on the qualifications of even some of the things that we tried to do this year. And it's critical. We need to make sure they're qualified and know what we have to do.
Well,
What are
it
you
sounds like you
referring
and
to,
Jess are in
Donna?
agreement then. We need qualified staff.
Yeah.
I mean, more. We have
Yeah.
qualified staff, but we need more.
But Donna, do you have a comment about this year's financial statements? Is that what you're referring to?
Nope, not yet. Not these, nope. I don't want to get into that. It has nothing to do with this audit meeting at this point.
Will, can I add one more comment just related to the
Ab-
audit?
Absolutely.
So as you're preparing for next year, which, will probably start shortly as you're preparing a request for proposal for audit services. The one thing I think you need to think about even before that goes out is realistically, when should your audit timing be? So if it's like, if we, the township, feel if we start on July 15th, we're not going to require all of this other, assistance to get it done, then the township needs to consider making that their audit date and concluding in the RFP. I mean, I think that needs to be, thought about and planned, and saying, okay, what do we think it's going to take? How long do we think it's going to take? And, you've got a lot of folks there who've been through a lot of audits. You're going to have, Ally and her team, and just work through that and work, be realistic. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling your hair out again if you're sitting there on June 15th and just say, you know what, I wish we would have given ourselves more time because we're just not ready. It's okay to be July 15th or whatever the right date. You don't want to be August 15th. I mean, that might be a little too tight, but I know your next firm will appreciate, that as well. If you're, closer to being 100% ready when they start, their engagement. That'd be, one other suggestion.
And I did have a chat with Ally. She had offered to take the lead on
Yes.
that.
On the request.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's already started.
Are we ready? for
Sorry.
public- Are we done with questions for the auditors?
I'm wondering, Donna, do you have anything to add?
No, not at this point, no.
Anybody else?
Okay. I mean, I would just say, I think that, when I look at the corrective action plan that we submitted last year, we tried to make it as realistic as possible. And, we run up against the limits of, the insufficient support from the board. We're starting to move forward, but things like when it actually comes down to a BSNA user access policy, those sorts of things, I think PM Gap is gonna do a good job of starting to get some of our processes in place, document, so that we're in a position where we can hire a finance director permanently. But I just have to say again and again, it's the lack of enough qualified finance staff working together with the right processes. I think that our readiness for the audit wouldn't be an issue if we had enough of the right staff to properly keep up the journals and ledgers throughout the year.
Let's move on to public comment. Who's gonna oversee the,
It's all one issue.
I hear you, I hear you.
is there anyone present who would like to make a comment?
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Dave and Ashley.
Dave and Ashley, thank you so much.
Thank you, and
We'll
we'll
talk-
get the reports out as soon as they're processed.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.
Hi, Pat Stein, noted thorn in the side of some of the board members, and today I'm going to do that point again. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room. So we hear about deficiencies, lack of controls, vulnerabilities for fraud. So a lot of this can be attributed, from what I'm hearing today, to the fact that the finance, well, let's see, the statutory duties of our clerk that were pulled a few years ago by yourself, or at your direction, Supervisor Hathaway, would restoring all of those controls, all of those statutory duties. I'm sorry, Mr. Hathaway, you want me to wait till a time? you're
No, go
available?
right ahead, I'm listening.
Multitasking.
Mhm.
Anyway, would restoring those statutory duties solve some of these problems we're having with our audits? And if so, you have quorum right here now. Why don't one of you make a motion to take a vote? Restore those statutory duties.
She already has them.
She
They were
does-
given
she
back.
does not.
They were.
She
given
does
back.
not.
No, they weren't,
This is-
Donna.
This is public comment, this is not a conversation.
Donna, that's not true.
So the answer is, why not? Why doesn't someone make the motion? We vote to restore the clerk's statutory duties. Let's get on the right tracks. The fact that we haven't had a finance person hired was also held up by yourself, Mr. Hathaway. For how long was that problem? We're starting to, but how long is that gonna take? So I see some problems where I don't see solutions. I see a time-consuming process of finding the correct person to join the finance department. We sure haven't done due diligence on that since we were short of staff. I mean, that's the way I look at it. And how long's that been? You know, how many months? So anyway, nobody wants to take my suggestion to make a motion and vote to restore all those duties?
That would be against the law.
Beg your pardon?
That would be against the law because this is a special meeting and the purpose of the special meeting was to.
This is a board of trustee meeting. This is a meeting with the board of trustees. You have
Yes.
quorum.
Absolutely.
You think we can make motions in this meeting?
Yes.
It's a
Why
special
not?
meeting
It's a
for the
special meeting
audit.
called for a
That's all
specific
you can
purpose.
deal with.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, does the agenda say special meeting? I didn't see that.
It is a special meeting for this purpose. It doesn't mean that motions related to this purpose couldn't be made, but I don't think that that's.
I'm sorry, on August 17th, 2021? 2021.
Yeah, I remember that.
I attended a meeting, special meeting to discuss Supervisor Hathaway, that is an insult.
Do you take it that way?
Absolutely.
What a baby.
Can
He
you?
walked
please
out of the
be
room.
quiet and muted?
Okay, all right, I'm done.
Pat, I'm sorry for that.
I'm sorry for all of you. I'm sorry for every member of the township. And after last night, I'm sorry for the residents of Scio or Modoc Township. My gosh.
In the absence of the supervisor, I'll facilitate. Are there any other members of the public who are present, who'd like to speak? I'm seeing none. Could we move to Zoom, please? Jillian, does anybody have their Zoom hand up?
Yes, we have 4. Let's start with Jonathan Greenberg. Sorry if somebody else had their hand before. Jonathan, could you unmute, please?
I am unmuted now. Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan.
What an interesting response to a resident's questions. Unbelievable weakness there. Just weakness. Weakness in his argument. And like any bully who gets pushed back, they run away. You know, as I sat yesterday and thought about my obnoxious comments at last night's meeting, I said, what is it that triggers me? Why do I get so upset when I see that behavior? And you know what it is? It's the bullying. It's the bullying. And he does it, and that fake security cop does it, and the attorney did it. And when I see that, I get really upset. And so sometimes I react. But it's nice to see the bully run away every once in a while. As for the mistakes being made and the ongoing issues with access and controls, it seems pretty clear to me that the clerk has the need, if not the absolute right, to review some of this stuff that's going on, because holy camole, where are we? We're in the same place we were a year ago with this audit. Well, except we found the checks, or I'm sorry, a bank found the checks. Folks, this is embarrassing. Please help the supervisor find some decency.
Thank you, Jonathan. Who's next?
Brian Yeaple. Brian, could you please unmute? Do we need that, right?
Yep, sorry, you had to give me the permission to unmute first. Good afternoon, everybody. Maybe not for some people. But it was very enlightening to listen to the auditor's discussion and presentation this afternoon. I do have to say, it is still troubling to me, especially after last year. During my move, actually, some of you probably remember when I went around to the board and handed out the 10-year review of all of the audits I did, where I found things that we just kept doing over and over again as findings. Many of them for 3, 4, and 5 years, sometimes consecutively. And we continue to do the same activity. Some of them are different, and that's good. I'm glad we've improved in some areas, but you know, segregation of duties and having custody and control are really key financial ideas and just components to having a good working order in the finance area. It is very concerning to me how we just don't have good controls over our finances. And I really hope that the board as a whole, I know there's several of the board members that can't be here. Hopefully they're able to watch this. I'm going to get the copy from Christy and upload this to YouTube. So hopefully I'll send it to Trustee Riser, Trustee Brazeau, and see if they're able to watch what occurred during this meeting. The other thing that is very, very concerning is just as Plant Moran mentioned, obviously we have the concerns from this year. We need to move forward on that. You as a board do need to think about how we're going to move forward with selecting a new auditor. Obviously, we have a lot to get done as a township. This needs to be of utmost importance, and we really need to focus on that as well. And frankly, it's going to be difficult, I think, if our new auditor or the parties proposing to audit us review this letter and see how it was somewhat difficult to work with Scio Township. Unfortunately, that's going to involve an increased cost. At least that would be my expectation. And ultimately, all of us as taxpayers are going to have to pay it. So thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Ryan. Next up.
Pam Boyd. Please unmute.
Thank you. Pam Boyd, a Scio resident. Such an embarrassment to have our supervisor walk out of a meeting. I concur with the well-spoken residents who came before me. So I won't repeat, other than it is a huge, huge disappointment to me that Clerk Flintoff's duties have not completely been returned to her. It is a disgrace. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Next up.
That would be, John Riser. John, could you unmute, please?
Hello, John Reiser, Scio Township resident. I would like to thank those of you on the board who could attend and deliver a quorum. I'd like to thank you, the clerk, for getting this set up so quickly. And most importantly, I'd like to thank Dave and Ashley and the rest of the Plant Moran crew for all the work that they did on this. It was, I've been following along and appreciate all the work that people did to get this audit done. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next up.
Paula G. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for getting the audit done and thank you for having it on Zoom. Well, if Mr. Hathaway, the supervisor, feels we are not in a correct meeting form to make any motions, I would like to see that at the next board meeting as new business at the top of the schedule, that we can put all this ridiculousness of not allowing an proper recording of records and the checks and balances that the public want. Not whether it's the clerk's duty, it's the residents see a problem that there are not proper checks and balances that are required in any government. Anyway, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Paula. Next up.
I see no more hands.
May I finish my 3 minutes?
Yes, please. I wasn't keeping time, but I trust you.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just going to clarify something and continue a sentence. So what I asked was why a motion wasn't made to correct what's been unjustly done the past few years. And when I said, why can't a motion be made at this meeting? Supervisor Hathaway mentioned that it would be illegal because this was a special meeting. So my argument is that it was a special meeting on August 17th, 2021, that special meeting to discuss the supervisor's duties and an org chart. And it was at their very meeting, special meeting, where he had made a motion, or Donna made it for him, one of his supporters, made a motion to double the supervisor's salary, double his working hours, and change his duties. That was at a special meeting. So anyone who's listening or ever watches this video, Supervisor Hathaway just lied. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, I see no further public comment. I just want to note, as soon as the audit is finalized, it will be published on our website and public record. And I want to thank everybody. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move it.
Support? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned at 3:25. Thank you, everybody.